Doug Gray, I'm the CEO of Action Learning Associates. I'm doing some doctoral research on positive psychology. The reason I want you to be able to apply the science that's been emerging for a while into your life, individually and organizationally. Let's make it simple. So I hope you enjoy these slides. The second question on the top of your page, how do you measure it? Many of you know that I'm a bit of a nerd for numbers, so you got Q1 and Q2 at the top, right? Q stands for questions. What are your strengths is the first question. Second is, what are you measuring? How many of you wear a Fitbit to measure your steps? Yeah. And Weight Watchers. Think about if you're measuring your net worth. Think about if you're measuring the number of contacts you make daily, the number of hours per day you read professional content. Whatever it is. Whatever you measure leads to an example or definition of who you are at your best. Make sense? Now, if you're not consciously measuring any of those things, I don't want to create a sense of, I should be, because you don't necessarily need to. We all measure whatever we need to. So I invite you to think about what you're measuring, and I'm going to give you 3 or 4 examples. Did this click on its own? That's cool. Of well-validated research that I find remarkable. This is one of those topics that's 5 or 10 years old in academia and needs to be in all of our practices. So that's why I'm giving you these slides. Lower turnover, increased productivity, 42%, really? Higher profits, every business I work with looks at that. A CEO, I've already made this point, who is other-oriented will outperform by 500%. So why isn't this being done? Why aren't we all talking about positive psychology? I suspect it's mostly because we don't really know who we are at our best and how to share it. So, how do you measure it? Think of it as 3 buckets. Some of you might have seen this slide before. Rob, when I was doing the trends and talent analytic sessions, where do we spend 60% of our money in LD? Bucket 1, 2, or 3? Can you see past me? Bucket 1. 60%. Well, why aren't we thinking about developing and retaining the desired employees? We don't want everybody, but we want the desired employees, right? So I think this is where we could spend our energy. How do you do that? Here's one way to measure it. A tech company that has a gross revenue of $3 million, has 10 employees, at 80K, we'll make it up. So their cost per employee is 27%, pretty low. Manufacturing company, same number up here, different number here. Their cost per employee is 80%. Pretty high. Low, high. What's it like in your organization? Most people in this room, I predict, cannot fill out this little chart, which often means that you're not connected to the financials in a way you need to be. So Doug's bias, one of Doug's biases, is that we need to control the financial directions of LD, whatever leadership development becomes. If you have any questions about the case study or the value or the need, speak to Stacy. She's masterful at this. And she's going to be recognized by the governor soon and in the news. Make sense? Think about filling out the costs. Think about the measures. What are the initiatives that you're implementing in your organization? It doesn't matter how big or small it is. This is a very simple framework. And I already boasted about Dave Vance. This is his framework. These 3 buckets. The senior leaders I work with are all accustomed to looking at spreadsheets. So when I come in with a 1 page, their opening line is, what do you got for me, Doug? Slide this, or whatever is similar, and then we can move forward. Make sense? So think about whatever you're measuring, because then we're going to apply it to this. You just wrote 2 questions in the top. There's 5 spaces around this weird shaped blue thing. And what I'm going to do is talk to each of them. But to do that first, I thought I'd ground this conversation into 2 conversations. So the first one is negative psychology. And I don't mean it to be pejorative, but really pretty descriptive. How do you explain evil in the world? How do you explain world wars? This is what psychology studied. And thankfully, we became pretty good at it. We looked at anxiety and depression. Something triggered, though, in 98. Do you know what? Anybody? Jane Trice?
The tide crisis.
I don't know. Aaron Shaw. What happened in 98? APA speaker, president named Martin Seligman was asked by his colleagues to turn the tide.
Yes.
Keep going. You know more of this, Kelly?
I know very.
Okay, that much.
No, they redefined some terminology and
Right.
had an impact.
Massive. So instead of 80% of the studies being focused on the negative story, instead of organizations being looked at as broken, like the mental illness model, like a physician model, how do we treat and solve? We're going to look at this other side, this other second conversation. So you probably heard some hype about this notion or phrase called positive psychology. It implies, naturally, that there's negative psychology, and that's certainly true. You could argue that over time we've looked at what are some of the problems in our lives. Mental illness is certainly one way to diagnose whatever's going on in our culture. And since the World Wars, we've gotten pretty good at looking at mental illness or anxiety or depression. Then some folks began to realize there was an imbalance, and in 1998, things pivoted. Martin Seligman and others who were called at the American Psychological Association to say, wait a minute, why is it that there's a 5-to-1 ratio, an imbalance? Most of the studies are focused on negative stuff. What if we flipped it around? What if we took a more balanced view of psychology and began to look at what causes meaning or value in our lives? What makes life worth flourishing? How do we thrive? And that led to this whole body of research that is called positive psychology. It's not an invented construct like psychodynamic tension or Freudian analysis. Think of it as an emergence that happened over time and had a tipping point roughly around 1998. Make sense?